Welcome to Lumon, a nimble new refiner.
Hello, refiners. If you're here, it's because you made the choice. Or perhaps the choice has been made for you. To delve deeper into the latest episode of Severance, Season 2, Episode 6, Attila. So let's just get straight into it. Now, I just have to say immediately that every single new episode of Severance just keeps reinforcing one thing to me. Hell. We are in hell. This is hell. The symbolism, the deeper layers of connections, just everything seems to tie back to sin, punishment, atonement, and control. It's just everywhere, and the more I see of it, the more I feel like this channel is becoming a full-on hell theory channel. And if that's what my whole thing is, then I guess so be it. Now, I immediately am going to be talking about Burt and Fields. And I have to say, the moment I saw Fields and just felt his whole vibe, demeanor, just his whole essence, I had a genuine physical gut reaction to him. I do not trust this man. I trust him actually even less than Burt. Both of them are definitely giving me off cautious vibes, like to be wary of them for some reason. But Fields especially made me have a physical gut warning reaction. And they say you have to trust your gut reaction. It is real. It's a real thing. So I'm just sharing with you that my gut says do not trust Fields. So the first thing we hear from Fields is him saying Attila, which we later in the episode find out is supposed to be this couple nickname type thing. And they obviously explain it started out as Hun, which is an affectionate, loving, warm nickname for your partner. But then it became Attila, a war criminal, destroyer, violent person. Like, I don't think this is just a playful shift in names. Fields is giving Burt a sentence. He's placing Burt in the category of someone who is a sinner, like Attila levels sinner. And this name immediately stood out to me because in Dante's Inferno, Attila the Hun is in the 7th circle of hell, which is in the river Phlegethon, which is a river of boiling blood. Now, what does this mean? Well, this all connects to the past 2 videos I've made on the last 2 episodes of this season, where in my video for episode 4, I was saying how I think we're following Dante's Inferno throughout hell. And if you want to hear more, you can go to that video, check it out. There's timestamps so you can skip to the bit where I talk about the whole Dante Inferno stuff. But it's just season 1, we're in limbo. Season 2, we're following the 2nd circle, which is lust, at least thematically, storytelling wise. That's what we're exploring. And obviously we see that throughout this entire episode. This entire episode was all just about lust. And then I explored where the show might end up, which is in the 9th circle of hell, which is depicted as a frozen lake. And then in my last video, which was for episode 5, I explored that there also seems to be a layer of us descending through Dante's Inferno by following the 5 rivers of the underworld. And again, that video has timestamps, etc., so you can go and check out what I had to say on it in more detail. But I was speculating that one of the 5 rivers, which is Phlegethon, is depicted as a fiery, blood, horror type river. And I thought this might be what the testing floor ends up being, that our characters have to cross through. So then, imagine me watching this episode and I'm faced with Attila the Hun being in the 7th circle of Dante's hell, which is Phlegethon, the river of blood. Guys, I think I'm onto something with all of my little theory crafting of hell. But I think this nickname is definitely significant, and I think it's letting us know that whatever Burt did to earn this nickname from Fields, I think it's going to end up being something similar to the real Attila. Not literally, like I don't think Burt has been like a mass murderer in the same sense, but I think his sin would also condemn him to the seventh circle of hell. So what is the seventh circle of hell? Well, people who end up there are those who possessed a thirst for violence and are condemned to drown in a lake of boiling blood, which, as we said, is the river Phlegethon. And this is for people who committed sins of violence. So whatever Burt has done definitely has to be some sort of level of violence. And I just think it's really interesting that we're also seeing this connection from taking things that existed in Greek mythology and then how parts of that inform Dante's Inferno, and how we're getting this crossover again, because again, in my previous videos, I explored how one of the 5 rivers of the underworld is Cahoots, and Cahoots is the name of the frozen lake at the bottom of hell in Dante's Inferno. So here we're getting yet another one of these rivers that ends up being almost rebranded into Dante's Inferno. And in Dante's Inferno, according to Virgil, the river of Phlegethon in the 7th circle eventually flowed through the 8th circle and collected in the 9th circle, where it froze to make the lake Cahoots. And I'm like losing my mind here, okay, with all of my little connections to all of this. Because in my last video, I was saying, what if we are following the 5 rivers of the underworld to eventually end up at the frozen lake in hell? And then I read this, which says that exact kind of thing. But now let me get back to this scene and about how they ended up calling each other Attila. So Burt obviously says it became Attila about 10 years ago. But Fields obviously ends up correcting Burt and saying it wasn't 10 years ago, it was 20. So 20 years ago, Fields started to call Burt Attila. So what happened 20 years ago to inform this nickname change? So Fields continues saying it was 20 years ago because he remembers we were having drinks with your Lumon partner. Quite startled him. So saying how they were already saying the Attila name in front of other people 20 years ago. So the key takeaway here is that Burt did something about 20 years ago which caused Fields to start calling him Attila. But now let's go more into what they also share in this scene. So obviously they're having a bit of a conflict here, since, as Irving states, didn't the first severed office open 12 years ago? And I, of course, believe that Fields was correct with the 20 years and accidentally letting it slip. Because we also get this scene later on in the episode when Irving is leaving. Burt tries to make sure the cover-up is cemented, because when he says, you know, he gets fuzzy. Like saying I worked at Lumon 20 years ago, which is, of course, before Severance even existed. Like, you wouldn't bring that up unless you were trying to, like, seal in the cover-up, basically. Also, another little hint that Burt is Attila, and he is going to be condemned to the 7th circle of hell, which is a river of, like, fire of blood, when he says no one's ever thrown blood on you on your way into work. So Burt is being covered in, obviously it's paint, but supposed to symbolize blood, which is how he would look if he was in the river Phlegethon, like drowning in a river of blood. Now, if we are, of course, believing that the 20 years is accurate, then we need to reevaluate what is shared in the scene with them at dinner. So they say how Burt was guided to Lumon's door by Jesus. So they had been attending the Lutheran church for years, and one Sunday, during a sermon, the pastor happened to mention the church's stance on severance, and that the pastor said that innies are complete individuals with souls that can be judged separately from their outie. So this is massively significant for multiple reasons, okay? So firstly, this stance actually kind of conflicts with Lutheranism in our real world, which traditionally upholds individual accountability and the belief that faith alone is sufficient for salvation, rather than blindly following a pastor's teachings. But in this world, it seems that they've adjusted their doctrine to accommodate the idea of severance, despite potential contradictions. And this is even more interesting because we now have been introduced to another religion that's present in the state of Caer PE that is different to the Caer Egan one. And this religion is promoting severance in their own way. So now we have to wonder, is Lumon actively working with or infiltrating outside religious groups? Now, this could be happening in different ways. So they could be planting leaders who secretly follow Lumon's agenda. So for example, the pastor who led this sermon could actually be planted there by Lumon and is like a Lumon loyalist. Or they could be buying out religious institutions through financial influence. You know, we have to remember the people involved in all of this stuff are just people. And people can be easily swayed for many different reasons. There can be many different personal things going on that influence someone's decisions. So it could be as simple as offering the pastor something that is personally beneficial for them. So it's just like one corrupt individual. Or what if, another option, Lumon are founding these religious movements from the ground up, ensuring their beliefs still align with part of the Caer Egan philosophy, which I think just seems to be, you know, promoting the idea of severance as a whole. But what I'm thinking is, like, obviously we know that Caer Egan and Lumon existed in the late 1800s. So what if they were already kind of like infiltrating and shaping new subsects of new like subcategories of religions? Because you know how like in real life, like let's take Catholicism for example, there's so many different branches of it. What if that's what we're seeing? Like we have the main Caer Egan religion that's present, but what if they've also amended it and have created multiple other branches that have in one way or another already infiltrated and are secretly in control of all of these other religions that are present in this world? And this would be crazy because this would mean they've been manipulating people for decades. And that might be why we see such weird town state of Caer PE, where most of the town is apparently severed and most of them act pretty weird. And we have to also think about the different ways in which Lumon are carrying out this strategy. So they're obviously just telling different groups of people whatever story they want to hear in order to sell the idea of severance. Because we've heard different conflicting takes on severance and I guess what the point of severance is so far. So firstly, in this episode, we obviously hear from Burt and Fields and the Lutheran Church perspective. It can be seen as a way of salvation, with the inner self going to heaven. But then in episode 2 of this season, we also hear how Milchick speaks to Outie Mark about it by saying about, when he was saying about Mark's innie's happiness will slowly make its way to his outie self. So this is like being sold to Outie Mark as a way to help yourself recover and heal from trauma. And then we also, this season, heard Miss Wong in the last episode say to Milchick that the innies shouldn't be allowed to have a funeral because it'll make them feel like people. So whatever side she's coming at it from, if it's from the Myrtle Egan School for Girls, they're being taught that severed people, the innie selves, aren't people. And then we obviously get another corporate insider perspective when we have Mr. Drummond saying to Milchick last episode about treating the innies, the workers, as what they really are. And now, all of this for me seems to be massively muddying the waters, probably purposely, for trying to understand what Lumon, the board, what their real motives actually are. Because the only kind of consistent thread is that they want to recruit as many people as possible to get severed. But why? And of course, this is very similar to how religious, cult, even corporation structures work in the real world, where the message they're giving out to try and recruit people is obviously deliberately tailored to different groups to appeal to a broader array of people. And it also enforces the whole like secretive hierarchical structures of deliberately giving different people different information, because it's also a form of control. It's like keeping people segregated into their own understanding of all of this. So now we're circling back to the 20 years ago thing. So we're believing that it was 20 years ago, and let's believe that how Burt ended up getting severed is the real story as well. That means that the pastor told them about the church's stance on severance 20 years ago. Which means this is some like secret church level type stuff. It means that they had like early access to severance before it went public 12 years ago. Which obviously does lead me to believe that the church's pastor is obviously involved in one way or another with Lumon. And I think this would have been like a secret knowledge thing, like, oh, the people who follow our religion in this church right now, we have been blessed to have this secret offering only given to us. What a great righteous thing to be blessed upon us. And I'm thinking, what if this is how Lumon was able to, under the radar maybe, first implant the chip into people as like test subjects. So like the Severance wiki page says that the Severance chip's first iteration was made approximately 20 to 25 years ago by James Egan, who showed it to Helena when she was a child. And obviously what stands out there 20 years ago? So for me, Burt was definitely one of the first people to get severed 20 years ago. And I think it happened as part of this like secretive religious thing. Now the way that Fields and Burt are telling this whole story about how Burt ended up getting severed, I think Fields definitely encouraged, or even just point out made Burt do it, because of him believing it was a way for Burt to end up in heaven. And this line stood out to me, where Fields is saying, what am I supposed to do up there for eternity all by myself? So he's saying, this isn't about Burt, it's about me. It's not about Burt being able to go to heaven. It's about Fields ensuring Burt is with him, which is obviously very selfish. And given that he has the nickname of Attila for Burt, it's just giving off all of these really enforcement religious perspective things, where Fields is on this kind of religious high ground and is saying to Burt, like, in order for you to join me in heaven, you have to do this thing. The church says it's a way for salvation, so you have to do it. And this is also revealing that Fields sees himself as someone who's already guaranteed to be in heaven. So his morality, his sins, none of that is questionable for him. So why is Fields so certain he'll go to heaven, Burt won't? And Burt won't because he did something so terrible 20 years ago, which gave him the nickname Attila. And with the Attila stuff as well, and what I said earlier in this video about it connecting to Dante's Inferno and Attila being condemned to the 7th circle of hell, the way Fields is approaching this whole thing, it feels like he might also be wanting Burt to atone for his sins in a similar way. Because why are you still calling him Attila after 20 years? I get that it could just be, it's like a couple's inside joke kind of thing, but I feel there's definitely a level of underlying emotional resentment still. And he's like purposely calling him Attila in a way to remind him of whatever terrible things he did before to earn that name. Now, if my interpretation about Fields' part in encouraging Burt to get severed because of what their pastor said as a way for him to have some sort of salvation in heaven, it made me think of it seemingly like a Faustian bargain thing. So let me just explore that idea with you for a minute. Now, a Faustian bargain is also known as like making a deal with the devil, and it can be seen as like the ultimate trap of someone's morality. It's where someone gets offered something seemingly invaluable to them, like power, knowledge, salvation, but the price is that they trade something far greater, like their long-term spiritual well-being. But in the moment itself, the person doesn't know how great of a cost this trade is. So the victim believes they're making maybe a rational choice, only to later discover they've condemned themselves and it's too late to be able to do anything about it. And the term Faustian bargain comes from the story of a character called Faust, who is a scholar that made a deal with Mephistopheles, who is a demon representing the devil, in order to gain knowledge in exchange for his soul. And of course we see this play out in a lot of modern storytelling stuff, because again, it's known as selling your soul to the devil. Now, Burt seems to be a character like Faust. He chose Severance believing it was a way to save a part of himself. And Fields was the one who convinced him that Severance was the only path to heaven, to salvation. But like how the whole story narrative of selling your soul to the devil goes, I don't believe that Burt's innie is going to heaven. I think this was almost a false promise from their church pastor, from Fields. But this shows how Fields is the Mephistopheles in this situation. In the original story, Mephistopheles doesn't drag Faust to hell. He frames the whole arrangement as a bargain, a fair exchange. And Fields seemingly does the same. He's selling Severance as a spiritual salvation for Burt. And he's not the devil himself, which I would say would be Lumon in this situation, but he's just acting on behalf of the devil, on behalf of Lumon, as like the middleman in between that's just there to offer a guiding hand. And this is interesting because in like storytelling narratives, the Faustian figures are usually either selfish or desperate, and that's how they end up making the deal. So if Burt is like Faust, I think he was coming at it from the place Fields was saying of it being like a desperate last chance of salvation. Which is interesting because, again, we still have to wonder, what has Burt done 20 years ago to earn the nickname Attila? And his sin is so great, he is willing to make this kind of thematic deal with the devil of getting severed in order to just have a chance of going to heaven. So I do believe Burt must feel a lot of guilt for whatever he did in order to be persuaded enough to go through with this. Now we'll circle back to what this might mean for Burt's storyline going forward in a moment. But first, I want to quickly mention this line in particular, where Fields says, "It was 20 years ago because he remembers we were having drinks with your Lumon partner." And again, this stood out to me because I'm thinking a Lumon partner. So remember, Burt was essentially recruited through a religious organization. So the terminology Lumon partner is making me think that they were initially assigned like a Lumon employee to maybe help them make the decision of being severed, I don't know, introduce them to Lumon. It just made me think of Mormon missionary partnerships where when Mormons are sent out to do their missionary work, they're paired up. So that's what I think is going on here. Like, I think the Lumon partner was someone who worked at Lumon that was supposed to act as like maybe a guide, a helper, mentor in some way. I think it's definitely a religious thing. I don't think it's a Lumon partner like this isn't the first time you've been involved romantically, sexually with someone at Lumon. Because that wouldn't make any sense, because how would that have been possible before now? Like, they only kind of figured out this Irving stuff because of what Lumon told them about, like, apparently getting fired because of an unsanctioned erotic entanglement. I can't remember the words they used. And obviously Burt then was suspicious of the guy showing up, banging on his door, figuring out it must have been the person he was connected to inside Lumon. So what I'm saying is, I don't think Burt has been involved with another Lumon worker like this before. Like what we're seeing with Burt and Irving, I don't think has happened before. So then what would having drinks with your Lumon partner? Because that's the thing. How would they have drinks with another Lumon severed person like 20 years ago? It doesn't make any sense. So my thing is, I think this Lumon partner thing is more likely to be similar to a Mormon missionary partner. And maybe this is part of like the secret religious stuff of how they had early access to Severance. Like maybe it's part of that whole deal, like they're valued as higher ranking severed employees in this like special division. And if they have Lumon partners, then this obviously can tie into how Burt is seemingly still in cahoots with Lumon, since in this episode we see Mr. Drummond entering Irving's home at exactly the right time. So he is obviously connected somehow to Burt, even if there are like other intermediaries in between them. the knowledge that Irving would be out of the house and at Burt's definitely made its way to Mr. Drummond so that he could go in and find out what Outie Irving knows is doing. And this is making me wonder if it was his connections at Lumon that initially told him to arrange a dinner with Irving to, one, maybe try and find out what Irving knows and what his intentions are, etc. Or two, they just wanted a way to guarantee he would be out of the house. Like, this could be a double intel gathering thing of both Mr. Drummond and Burt trying to get intel from Irving. Or it could just be Lumon saying, hey, have dinner with him so that he's out of the house. And this scene where Drummond pulls out all of those keys, this is making me think he's the Baird Creek Bandit that was in the newspaper article from episode 1 of this season that Milchick briefly shows Mark. Like, Mr. Drummond is the one going round, letting himself into people's homes. Like, that's a massive collection of keys. So this is clearly all the keys to probably all the housing in this little development, because we know that Irving, Mark, and Dylan all seemingly live in different neighborhoods. So I bet this is just like all the keys for, is it Lenora Lakes or Lake that Irving lives at? And this is super suspicious how we don't really see how Mr. Drummond is able to open Irving's lock. But he just seemingly is able to open it. And then all of Irving's intel is just laid out on top. Which is really interesting because in episode 9 of season 1, when the OTC stuff happens and Innie Irving is looking through his belongings, when he opens this chest, he has to get the key out of his pocket. And we don't see Drummond using a key to open this, so was it already open maybe? And this time when we open the trunk, all of his intel is just out in the open, whereas Innie Irving had to like lift something out of the trunk to then reveal all of this secret stuff. So now I don't know if Outie Irving is maybe just a little bit more reckless with his data protection stuff. But what if he suspected this was going to happen and he's like purposely letting Lumon, Mr. Drummond, find out everything he knows? Like, it could go either way. But I will be very sad if it was just like a careless mistake, because Outie Irving seems like a really nice guy and he seemed like he genuinely enjoyed having dinner with Burt, probably not the Fields part. But it just seems like it's too easy to set up Irving accidentally being a bit careless. And then obviously Lumon's now going to be after him. But it would be more interesting, I think, if Irving was kind of like 2 steps ahead of them. Like, he also was going to Burt's to get intel, because he obviously is the one that asks Burt, like, I'm interested, like, how did you join Lumon? And the way that all of his intel is just kind of readily available, like, maybe he knows. So he, like, purposely set this up. I don't know. And obviously, where is his dog, Radar, in all of this? It just seems to me a bit too easy for Mr. Drummond, Lumon, to arrange for Irving to be out so they can go through his stuff, when surely Irving would know that this was going to be a possibility, especially with the Burt stuff. Like, he obviously knows something with the OTC happened, etc. So he should be on high alert. So I don't know, just things to make note of. Now, my current thoughts on the Burt-Lumon connection is I suspect Burt probably got in touch with his contacts at Lumon after the Irving OTC thing happened of him banging on the door, they probably were the ones to say, oh, why don't you invite him to dinner or whatever, and we'll try and find out what's going on. They probably obviously won't say, and we'll sneak into his home. They probably were just like, oh, maybe try and find out some information on your own. I don't know. But then we see Fields say, in present tense, that he's been talking to Pastor Gale about this. Now, we later hear in the episode Helena say to Mark about the OTC that happened the other night. So we're obviously... all of these events are obviously happening in such a short period of time. And Fields is obviously the one that cancelled his and Burt's trip because he suspects, obviously, Irving banging on the door was the person he had an affair with inside Lumon. So that means Fields has been talking to Pastor Gale, probably just within the past few days, about what happened with all of this, like, revelation with the OTC affair stuff. Which is also showing they're seemingly still a part of the church that originally suggested Severance as a means of salvation. And Fields is telling us right here that he recently was talking to the pastor about all of this. And if the pastor's obviously connected to Lumon, Fields is also directly connected to Lumon. So Lumon's gonna know Burt and Fields' entire stance on this whole thing and how to, like, manipulate it. So I'm thinking both of them are in cahoots with Lumon, maybe in different ways, maybe in subtle ways, but there's definitely multiple layers of connections going on here. But this is where I think things get even more interesting. I think Burt actually does like Irving, which obviously complicates the whole being a bad guy connected to Lumon stuff going on. And I think this also obviously ties into, again, how we're following the theme of lust and how people's emotional, lustful feelings can interfere with the decisions they make. Like, I think Burt is potentially maybe going to have this moral conflict where he's obviously involved in Lumon in some way or another, but I think he genuinely likes Irving and likes the fact that they had some sort of relationship at work, which is how we would get a really interesting storyline with Burt's character of this whole conflict between, like, what his heart wants versus what his commitments are. Like, his commitments to Fields, to Lumon, to being severed, to hoping to go to heaven. And with what we saw with Mr. Drummond finding out all the intel Irving has, this obviously makes me concerned for Irving and that he's going to be next on Lumon's hit list. And this is where we now circle back to how Burt's storyline might end up going. So if Burt is Faust, there are basically only 3 possible ways the whole Faust deal with the devil thing goes. It's either they have to just accept their fate, they're bound to hell, they're bound to damnation, they can't do anything to change it. There's the option where he somehow is able to escape out of the deal, but obviously that would come with so many different, like, hurdles and conflicts to get over to be able to do that, because obviously it's not going to be easy. Or 3, a fan favourite of the Faustian bargain story is when someone is smart enough to find a loophole in the deal with the devil so they can get out of it. So how might this look for Burt? So option 1, if he accepts his fate, accepts damnation, I think this would mean he stays as a bad guy, he stays involved in whatever Lumon's doing, he's part of whatever ends up happening to Irving, and that's just his role. His role becomes being a bad guy. the second option of somehow escaping and achieving salvation on his own terms, this could mean, I would say, maybe like running away with Irving, where it's like a chance for him to abandon all of the bad guy stuff he's been a part of, all the stuff that made him have the nickname Attila, etc. However, I don't think this is likely because these are old men and I don't think they'd be so quick to just uproot their whole life when they've only got a finite amount of time left on Earth. So I don't think that's going to happen. But what I could see is maybe the outsmarting the devil thing of finding a loophole. But the loophole isn't for himself, it's for Irving. So I'm thinking, at the minute, maybe the best way for this storyline to go is if Burt is having these internal conflicts because of lust, he might choose to make better decisions about his involvement when it comes to what happens to Irving. So if he knows that Lumon will do whatever they're going to do to Irving, maybe he informs Irving, like gives him a heads up, helps him escape, so that he's also not going to be condemned to hell like how Burt sees himself as being condemned to hell already. And I obviously think that would be the most interesting way to take all of this with the options I've laid out. But again, let me know what you think about these options. Or if you have any like other alternative options of your own for how Burt's storyline might play out, especially in this like being similar to the character of Faust, deal with the devil kind of conflict stuff. Now, carrying on with the amount of religious cult symbolism stuff we see in this episode, let's talk a bit about Milchick. So in my last video, I said I don't think Milchick is like bought into the Keir Egan religious cult side of things. But this scene, this episode, it's made me slightly change my mind. I now think Milchick definitely follows some sort of religious cult stuff. But I don't know if it's specifically Keir Egan's. But again, as I was explaining with the whole Burton Field stuff, maybe most other religions have been infiltrated by Lumon, by the Keir religion at some level. So maybe it all does link back to being Keir Egan's religion. Now, we obviously see that Milchick has put many pieces of papers together, with paper clips being the right way around. And once he's done, he opens up his little performance review stuff, which is obviously telling us that him doing this repeated action with the papers and the paper clips is him atoning for one of his contentions from his performance review. And I'm wondering, is this Lumon making him do this? Like, is it Lumon higher-ups, Mr. Drummond, saying, here is your contention, and here is how you're going to atone for it? And being specific, like, you're going to put together this many pieces of paper to practice getting the paper clips the right way round. Or is Milchick able to have some sort of decision in what type of form his atonement is in? Because if this is directly coming from Lumon, then this is the first time we're seeing Milchick essentially being punished in a very religious cult type way, which is obviously reminiscent of how the innies are punished in the break room of just having to do this repeated task until the higher ups are satisfied that you have now repented enough. And this is of course interesting because it's revealing to us that Milchick is a part of the Lumon religious cult type stuff that's going on. But again, how much of this was Milchick involved in? How much of this is him doing it to himself? And this is then obviously when we move on to see him go into the little backroom bit, turn on a light, and start speaking to himself in the mirror. Now, the first thing he says is repeating the line he said to Miss Wong earlier in the episode, and he's saying it the exact same way he said it to her. So I think this is him, like, repeating it in the mirror so he can see how he came across to her when he said it. But then, when he says it the second time, he puts emphasis on the word yourself in the sentence. So now he's making it a point that it's about yourself. And he's obviously speaking to himself. So I think this is now changing into him saying the line to himself. So first time, it's him repeating how he said it to Miss Huang to see how he came across to her. But now he's saying it to himself. And then as we're leading up to him repeating it for the third time, we see him obviously looking down, the camera's zooming in. He slightly moves away from his whole face being shown in the mirror. And it's like he's taking a moment to collect himself, to get into the headspace of a different person, of a different persona. So now, as he's saying this to himself here, you must abandon childish things, I believe this is him repeating what someone would say to him. So I think as he was growing up, he was told the sentence, you must abandon childish things. And the way he's saying it to himself is repeating the indoctrination he previously experienced from someone else. So he's now being this authoritative figure to himself and instilling these indoctrinated thoughts into himself. And this line specifically, the you must abandon childish things, this massively stuck out to me because I heard this recently, which is weird. I don't know where I heard it. I was definitely just watching something. But they were talking about how this concept is present in various religions. And it's supposed to be a thing of like, in order to be an adult, you have to get rid of all of your childish things. So you can only be an adult once you stop playing with your toys, stop emotionally acting out. So this line is religious. Because like I said, it literally does exist in religions. And I believe he's repeating these things he was once told by someone else to himself, because I think he's clearly bothered, emotionally bothered by his performance review, by the contentions. He is feeling many emotions, and we're witnessing him taming his tempers. He is reminding himself, you must abandon childish things. You must grow up. Stop being affected by these minor things. Tame your tempers. And I think it's so clear that this is obviously like religious atonement stuff, language, because we see his eyes being teary. So he's massively, he's being the authoritative enforcer to himself. And he's like battling this out, which is, again, it's like taming the tempers. And repeating the word grow, I think, is him really trying to, he's like embodying this essence of this previous teacher of his. And he's trying to almost like instill this fear within himself that he has to suppress how he's feeling and just grow. You just have to grow up in this situation. Just use all of this as an opportunity to grow, because the way you're feeling is unacceptable. So this is now making me wonder, who told Milchick these things? Is he a part of the Egan religion stuff? Did he maybe go to a school similar to Ms. COBEL? I'm sure we might get more of his backstory, but to me this entire scene is just showing us he definitely also has his own religious cult trauma stuff going on. Like, this whole scene is like textbook generational religious trauma stuff. And we see how he's like repeating the generational trauma of passing on this indoctrination to the next generation by him saying the same sentence to Miss Huang. He's like carrying on this religious cult indoctrination. He is keeping the generational religious trauma cycle going. Like, people raised in these kind of systems, they often repeat the same language they were taught. And again, this is just how like these abusive trauma cycles continue, and it's how like certain belief systems just get passed down. And the fact he's doing this in the present moment, in this episode, in this scene, the fact he's like making himself go through this corrected behavior, this is making me think he's not just someone who, when he was maybe growing up, was in this religious stuff. I think he must still be in it in order for him to be in the present moment, reminding himself of all of this, like putting himself through his own little break room thing. And since I mentioned the whole religious taming of the tempers thing, I am once again here to say, where is COBEL? Bring back COBEL! So since this whole episode was just full of religious cult stuff, I'm trying to think about what's really up with Lumon and the board. Like, how did all of this begin? What's up with Kate Egan? What's really going on? What's their goal? What are they doing? So I'm going to present you with a couple of different options to just what's going on with all of this. And I want to hear what you think is going on. So, this is a little game of what came first, the religion or the company. So, option 1, theory 1. Lumon, the company, came first, and then the religion. So what this would mean was that Kate Egan founded Lumon, and over time, his philosophy took on some sort of religious significance, with followers, people seeing him as a visionary or a prophet, and somehow a religious movement was made. But where does the board come into all of this? Did the board exist, again, before or after the religion? If the board was a part of the company first and the religious aspect came later, who decided to bring the religious element into it? Was it the board? Now, if it is a whole, the company came first and then the religion came after, this would be similar to like religious cults that we have in our real world, where they have like the overarching religion or company, but then one person is like put up on a pedestal and in one way or another kind of worshipped. So then, option 2, theory 2. The religion of Keir came first, and then the company Lumon was built around the religion. Now, I'm thinking this one might be more likely. It seems to make more sense to me that there would be this already religious structure that exists, that we're able to build a company that's so intertwined with religious stuff because it was all already there. So then, what was this religion that first existed? Did Keir Egan himself start his own religion, like he was a cult leader starting his own religious following thing first? Or was Keir Egan a part of a different religion who ended up like transforming their religious beliefs as a group into placing Keir Egan as a figurehead? Now, there's another YouTube channel called Real Enigmas and Theories, and he made a video about this recently, which I'll link in the description below. And he put forward the idea that a group of religious people already existed, and somehow Keir Egan got involved and they selected Keir Egan to be like the figurehead of this religion that kind of already existed. I think that's what his whole thing is. Just go and watch the video yourself for more information. But for me, this would mean that the board would still be these higher up religious figures, and the whole Egan family are just like figurehead puppets that they use to keep the whole illusion of this like company family front thing going. And again, we see this in a lot of like religious cults that already exist in real life, where there's like a general figurehead that the public know of, but in the shadows, there's actually all of these other people that are making all the decisions in secret, which is obviously very reminiscent to how the board has been presented to us. And to go back to earlier on in the episode, Burt and Fields obviously said that their pastor shared the church's stance on severance, which I think happened 20 years ago. So seemingly to me, this seems like Lumon were originally maybe selling severance as a religious thing, which I think makes it more likely that the religion came before the company. Like, what if there is some truth to the religious aspect of severance? Like, what if it is like a scientific, psychological, philosophical baptism of some sort? Because they consider the innies as newborns, so what if like the board, the religious higher-ups actually believe they're creating a new human existence of like pure, faithful individuals? There are just so many layers now to all this religious stuff. Like, this episode really hammered it in for me with all of this. So I would like to know what you think. What came first? The religion or the company? And if you have like, you know, wildcard options, maybe they both were created at the same time. Still, I want to hear what your thoughts are, because at the minute, I can kind of see it going either way. I think I'm leaning more towards definitely like the religion coming first, because Real Enigmas and Theories video on it has kind of convinced me that the board might be this secret group of religious people who just chose Keir as a figurehead. Like, we hear in the Keir hymn that Ms. COBEL sings, it goes like, Keir, chosen one, Keir. And again, as Real Enigmas and Theories pointed out, who chose him? Who is, like, how is Keir the chosen one? Who chose him? Now, another little theory that I've changed my mind about since my last video is, I said before that I'm not sure if Reghabi and Irving are working together, and I thought maybe Irving's working for a different anti-Lumon organisation. But this scene, this episode, has now made me go back on that thought, and I'm back to considering they might have been working together. Because during this scene, she says to Mark, do you remember a hallway? A black hallway? Why is she asking Mark specifically about the exports hall? Like, that's so specific, and we obviously know that Irving knows about the exports hall because he obviously was painting it all. And why is Reghabi now asking Mark about it? I think this might be proof that Irving and Reghabi were at least working together in the past. Because if she knows about the black hallway existing and she's probing Mark to see if he saw it, she clearly knows it exists, and she clearly wants the innies to go down it and to, I don't know, find out what's down at the end of the black hallway, like what's down on the testing floor. Because we've been thinking since like season 1, like, why is Irving painting the black hallway? How would he know about it? What if he knows about it because Reghabi told him about it? Maybe she has a photo of it or something. Or maybe she's seen it herself, I don't know, but somehow she knows how it looks. And what if she passed that information on to Irving? But as we obviously see in this episode, she's the one like pushing Mark to like basically be this scientific experiment with the whole chip stuff she's doing. And she's the one that has kind of manipulated Mark into reintegration and being her test subject. So her like whole thing just seems to be she wants to reintegrate someone who works on the severed floor at this Lumon branch so that they can find the black hallway, the exports hall, for whatever reason. And she needs someone on the inside to do that because whoever her internal contacts are clearly aren't able to do what she's wanting. And she said about reintegration to Mark like being the only way to get information in and out. So she seems to be trying to recruit severed employees for her own personal goals. She obviously worked with PD. And he was like mapping the floor. So we know he was definitely, I think, trying to find the black hallway, the exports hall. And she also says to Mark to finish the work that PD started. So PD, what did we see of his work? He had just mapped the floor. And I think if she was working with Irving, she probably was trying to pressure Irving to be reintegrated, but Irving was probably like, no thanks. And he doesn't have a Gemma Ms. Casey connection, probably, that she can like use to manipulate him with. So Irving was probably like, I'm not doing that, but I will try and do the memory bleed stuff, however he knows about that. And I think that's why when he's at the payphone trying to call whoever it is, in both those scenes we see in those 2 different episodes, he's like trying to call someone and they're not answering. I think that's him trying to contact Reghabi now. And she's not interested in pursuing their joint work because he's not willing to do it the way she wants, which is like through reintegration. So she's now moved on to a new target, which is obviously Mark. So the questions here are, what is Reghabi's actual motive? Why does she want an INI worker to find the exports hall and seemingly maybe find out the testing floor stuff? And she's obviously relying on these individuals to bring the intel to the outside to her. So we have to wonder, what is she trying to get? What is she trying to find? And just another little subtle detail I picked up on that I wanted to share that I thought was a bit interesting was during Helena's conversation with Mark. She's talking to him about his experience with the OTC, and she says, I'd love to hear about your experience sometime. And she says, I mean, I can't imagine how confusing that must have been. Traumatic even. I think this is her subtly trying to actually like genuinely connect with him. I think this is her as Helena showing how she felt about the OTC happening to her, because they've both had it happen to them, but obviously he doesn't know that. And I think this is her sharing. She found it traumatic to have her INI just take over her body like that. And obviously she's really into Mark. That's why she's found him at this Chinese restaurant, why she's talking to him, trying to connect with him. But I think this bit in particular is genuine, of her trying to connect on this like deeper shared traumatic experience. Because he would be the only other person that she can speak to about it that would understand what she's gone through. Obviously, she's not going to tell him she's gone through it, but she's obviously not going to go speak to, like, Irving about the whole OTC thing. And no one else is going to understand what happened to her. So this is, like, her only opportunity to actually connect and share with someone what her as Helena went through as well. And whilst I'm just talking about Mark and Helena, I just want to also briefly mention this line that Mark says to Helly, where he says, "We shared vessels." Now, another callback to my previous video. Towards the end of my last video, I spoke about how the Egans might be able to live forever by basically using permanent innies, physical bodies like Miss Casey, as a way to live forever. So, like, if they're able to turn people into innie onlys and essentially shut off access to their outie counterpart, they might be able to transfer another person's consciousness into the innie only person. And those consciousnesses would obviously be of, like, the Egan family. And then they obviously then will have a physical human body to, like, walk around in, and they also get a separate innie worker that they can just send to do whatever if they need to. And the way I described it was as vessels. So when Mark said we shared vessels, it just massively stuck out to me, because I was like, that is the wording I used when describing how the Egans could live into perpetuity. So again, if you want to, like, hear a bit more about that, timestamps in my previous video for episode 5. It's towards the end. Like, it's titled, like, how the Egans could live forever. Because it's obviously very specific, purposeful terminology that is being used here. So I'm just saying, I think it means something. And again, I think I might be onto something again. Who knows? But anyway, those are just all of my thoughts and theories about the latest episode of Severance. But let me know what you think. Do you agree with the things I shared in this video? Do you disagree? What theories are you currently cooking up? Whatever thoughts you have, just be sure to let me know in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as it lets the algorithm know you want to see more content like this as I continue covering this season and beyond. And to those of you who have already subscribed, as I'm recording this, we're so close to nearly 500 subscribers, which is super cool, and I'm really thankful to everyone who seems to be enjoying these videos I'm making. And it's just really cool to see what everyone's thoughts are in the comments. So I want you all to know I appreciate each of you equally. But now, if you've made it to the end of this video, congratulations! You have now reached 100% on your file. A handshake is available upon request. And remember,
I love you, but now I must away, for there are others who need me around the world. Goodbye.